Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 2nd of February of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the most important update of today is that the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Valery Zaluzhny, was dismissed from his position and basically he was fired by Zelensky. We were expecting this update probably 2 weeks ago or maybe a week ago, but according to information we have, the conversation between Zelensky and Zaluzhny took place a few days ago, weeks ago, but for some reasons either Zaluzhny and Zelensky took a decision to take a small pause to wait for a little bit. But now we see that currently there are a lot of problems in Avdiivka and there is no time to wait anymore, and Zaluzhny should be dismissed and his position should be taken by someone else who can take the situation in his hands and probably to stabilize or maybe to resolve the situation of Avdiivka. I'm not saying about the winning of battle for Avdiivka. Basically the new general, the new commander-in-chief at least can create or can organize the evacuation and retreat process from Avdiivka itself. Now let's return back to this update. This report we got somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time. Zelensky had meeting with Zaluzhny. He thanks him for the service, for 2 years of clashes shoulder to shoulder with the Russians. Everything of course is polite, everything is very polite, that they're friends, that there is no problems between them or something like this. But of course we understand the conflict that was between them and so on. And after this first update, we also got the report from the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, from Rustam Umerov. He also confirmed Zelensky's decision and that Zaluzhny was dismissed. And after that, Zelensky published his own video where he was talking about all these things, about his decision. And also he told us that he appointed the General Syrskyi on the position of Commander-in-Chief. So you might say, who is Syrskyi? And if you we don't have him on map, but before the next video I will try to update the map. We will remove Zaluzhny from this position because from now on he's nobody in Ukraine. I don't know what kind of position he was appointed to, but according to the sources we have, he was appointed to the embassy and the ambassador in the United Kingdom. We will add Syrskyi on map, and from this moment he is going to be a very important person. I had during the previous week we were talking about who would let's say replace Zaluzhny. My position was that Budanov would do this, but now we see that Budanov continues staying on his position at the head of the main Directorate of Intelligence. Maybe he will be the next one, I don't know, but let's see. So a few words about Syrskyi. Who is Syrskyi? And when talking about Syrskyi, he hasn't won even a single battle with Russians. He lost the battle for Bakhmut, he lost many other battles. Currently Syrskyi tried to create defense belt in the vicinity of Kupiansk. Maybe we can say that Kupiansk is the only successful place of Syrskyi command, because the Russians still haven't managed to establish control over Sinkovka. And as I understand, this is basically because of him or thanks to him. But I'm not sure whether Syrskyi was responsible for battle for Rabotina. I don't remember this. But anyway, when talking about the entire Ukrainian officers and people who can replace Zaluzhny, obviously Syrskyi is the best candidate for this role, because Syrskyi has been fighting with the Russians probably since the beginning of the special military operation. He knows the Russians, he knows the tactics, and he knows the structure, he knows the military forces. Probably people also, I don't know, support him, believes him, and he is from the ground. He is like infantry, he is the soldier. He's not like Budanov, like intelligence officer, so he is very close to the spirit of Ukrainian soldiers on the ground. So when talking about the current situation, I'm not saying that Syrskyi is able to change the situation, but obviously he is the best candidate for this role. When talking about Ukrainian, every single candidate that we can find in the Ukrainian military and political authorities. Now let's move to the situation on the ground. We have a lot of very interesting updates, and of course the most important updates as usually are coming from Avdiivka direction. As we were talking in the previous videos, the Russians managed to penetrate Ukraine defense belt. They entered the central part, yet we haven't received even a single geolocated video confirmation of Russian progress along all the streets in the central part, but we continue receiving more and more updates from different sources on the ground that repeat each other. Some of them have real inside, some of them doesn't have any insights, and they just copy past the reports from different sources. But anyway, what we have for as of today is that the Russians are trying and planning to establish control, are moving in direction of the chemical plant from the southeast. The Russians are moving in direction of the 0542 road. The Russians are moving in direction of the let's say bus station, bus base, and so on, and that the Russians during the previous night were bombing this territory heavily. According to information we have, the Russians used up to 100 FABs and guided bombs in 3 sectors. Mainly the Russians were bombing the chemical plant with the purpose to pin the Ukrainians down and probably to ease the movements of the Russian forces in this direction. The Russians were bombing the positions of Ukrainian forces in the 9th block. This is the second area of the most concentrated area with Ukrainian soldiers. The Russians were bombing this territory with the same purpose, not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy some reserves to the central part. Probably the Russians managed to complete this mission. And of course the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions along Industrial Ave. Currently we don't have any updates regarding the losses the Ukrainians had, but the main purpose of those attacks was not to get losses and to reduce the Ukrainian army, but to pin them down, to ruin their logistics, and not to allow them to be flexible, mobile, and to send forces from one side of Avdiivka to another. Anyway, when talking about the chemical plants today, this evening, we got few interesting reports from different, let's say, sources that the Russians are moving in direction of the chemical plant from the south. The Russians stopped any movements in the central. Maybe they have some activity to maintain positions, to stretch the forces, to get more blocks and so on. But according to 2 very reliable sources, the Russians are moving in the direction of the chemical plant. And according to one of the sources, he says that very likely the Russians will enter the chemical plant from the south. We need to understand one thing, that the Russians are not going to storm chemical plant to bypass, to penetrate the defense belt, to capture all these things and to enter, let's say, the northern part from the south. No, this is not the main purpose. And other Russian sources are saying that the Russians are moving to 0542 road. So basically, according to these 2 sources, completely independent, we can summarize the reports. The Russians are planning to establish control over something like this. If the Russians are able to do this, then they will be able to cut the Ukrainians completely, the Ukrainians from the central and the eastern part and the southern from the chemical plant, and this is going to be 2 completely different defense belt. Also, the Russians continue, according to the sources, pushing in direction of the bus station. So this is like as mass operations regarding the losses, regarding the reports from different directions, like to attack the chemical plant from the south and to attack the bus station is the primary target of the Russians right now. Right now they are doing like this. And of course, this will allow the Russians to achieve significant results. And the most important one is that they will be able to cut 0542 road that Ukrainians used to support their forces in Avdiivka itself. And from this very moment, the Ukrainians will have just one supply road from Orlovka using the local roads with very poor quality. This one will be blocked and cut off by the Russians. The Ukrainians will have still this one. And of course, the Ukrainians still gonna have the road Stepova Severna and 9th quarter. This one, but according to information we have, the Russians are moving in this direction as well, from the south and probably from the industrial Ave as well. If the Russians are able to get as close as possible to this road will be cut off as well, and the Ukrainians will appear in a cauldron. But regarding these updates, regarding all these beautiful pictures with the cauldrons with different things, of course we continue receiving updates from the eastern part, and currently at this stage of the special military operation, it is very important to attack on the eastern and the southeastern direction. Why is that? I'll explain to you in a moment. But before we move to the eastern part, few more things about the central and the central updates. According to information we have, the Russians continue advancing in the central part, and today they got achieve, let's say, few more streets were captured by the Russians. They managed to maintain their positions. The Ukrainians are withdrawing and retreating their positions. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions in the vicinity of the Blue Lake, and they forced the Ukrainians to step back from the hill. As you can see, according according to the map, there is a hill, this one. It's like 15 meters above the surface, and this is very important positions that Ukrainians were using for, let's say, coordinations, for controlling the Russian movements. And according to information we have, as a result of bombings, as a result of attack, the Ukrainians were forced to step back to the central part in the residential area. Currently, this territory is in the gray zone. And now we can, another important thing about, let's first move to the eastern part. Now let's talk about the eastern part. We have already covered the situation in the morning update. The Russians intensified their activity in direction of this residential area, and the main purpose of the Russian attack is to cut the Ukrainians, let's say, this company stronghold, and to force the Ukrainians to step back. So the question is why the Russians are doing this. Because if we understand the situation correctly, if the Russians are able to capture the southern part of the chemical plant and the bus station, obviously this is going to be the end of Avdiivka. And let's say if the Russians are able to move another few hundred meters to the north, this is going to be Cauldron. So what is the purpose to attack on the eastern flank, and what is the purpose to storm and attack the filtration station? And the thing is that the Russian combat line is too long now. The Russians managed to attack in the central part, so there are a lot of wedging, a lot of let's say penetrations, and the line of combat contact is too long for the Russians. But we need to understand that the Russian reserves are not endless. For example, when talking about the eastern flank, about this territory, if we try to calculate the line, the length of the combat contact line, we're gonna see that currently the Russians need to protect and need to keep forces on around once again, let's try to calculate the distance. The Russians need to keep forces on around 9 kilometers area. So imagine yourself 9 kilometers area, and the Ukrainians, for their defense purposes, need to keep forces just on let's say 2 kilometers area. So they need to keep probably 10 times less forces than the Russians in the same area. But if the Russians are able to establish control over this entire territory, to capture this residential area, to capture the stronghold that located to the south on Kamyanka, then the distance and the length of the front line that the Russians need to keep and to hold the territory will be around 1 kilometer, a little bit less than 2 kilometers. So this will allow the Russians to reduce the number of forces here, to use these forces, and to use these forces, the released forces, somewhere else, to send these forces to the central part, to reinforce Russian offensive operation in the vicinity of the chemical plant, or to reinforce the Russian positions, let's say in the vicinity of the southern direction, and many other places where these forces could be very useful. For now, it's the very important step. Of course, we can say about strategical attacks, about encirclements, and about the cauldrons, but any further Russian progress, any further Russian attack can lead to increase of their losses. Before the final attack, which will take place obviously within the next few days, the Russians need to maintain the flanks, need to maintain the line of combat contact, and to shorten the line of combat contact. It will allow to release the forces, which will be very useful on other directions. And the same story we can say about the filtration station. Once again, we can calculate the distance. Now the Russians need to keep forces on around, let's say something like 4 kilometers line. But if they're able to capture and establish control of the filtration station, they will be able to reduce the forces to 1 kilometer. So they're gonna need 3 times more forces on this direction. Additional 500 or 1,000 of units will be redeployed, let's say, to the south. And of course, the most important, the most painful area for the Russians is the former air defense base, because now the Russians need to, let's say, to keep something to control and to protect and to defend and to keep forces on around 11 kilometers line. But if the Russians are able to establish control over the former air defense base, this will allow the Russians to reduce the length of combat contact line till probably 4 kilometers, so 3 times less, right? And also these forces will be released, and they will be very useful, let's say, to attack the 9th quarter, or let's say not to allow the Ukrainians to complete successful evacuation. So now this is the main part, and obviously the next few days, maybe this weekend, the Russians will be completely focused on the maintaining of the line of combat contact. Of course, I'm not saying that the Russians will stop on the south of chemical plant. They will not stop. They will continue pressure. Maybe they will capture this territory. Obviously they will capture this territory, but the reserves and resources are not endless. Also, we got very interesting, let's say, analysis from the 46th Air Mobile Brigade official from their official Telegram channel. They have, let's say, made a very interesting analysis, and they pointed four important things about the Battle of Avdiivka. The Ukrainians are saying that now the biggest problem and the biggest mistake of the Ukrainian forces is that the Russians managed to establish control or to get as close as possible to the chemical plant, and that this road 05 or 42 has been cut off by the Russians recently, and now the Ukrainians lost the only important and valuable supply road that Avdiivka has. Also, the Russians, the 46th Air Mobile Brigade says that the Russians are getting closer and closer to the final supply road between Severna and Avdiivka, and currently this is already a game. This is already a game, like a casino. So it's or you are able to bypass, or you will be killed as a result of FPV drone strike or artillery. So currently the losses of Ukrainian soldiers who use this road is very heavy, very heavy. It's like a game in casino. It's like Las Vegas currently. It's not living road. It's like Las Vegas and nothing more. Also, the Ukrainians are saying, or 46th Brigade is saying, that the Russians managed to get a lot of experience and a lot of conclusions from the Battle of Bakhmut, and the Russians made a lot of work on their mistakes, and now they try to avoid the mistakes, and they're doing this attack perfect. The 46th Brigade confirms that the Russians are conducting this operation perfectly, but when talking about the Ukrainians, they're saying that after the Battle of Bakhmut, the Ukrainians haven't managed to get any, let's say, experience, any lessons, and they're doing the same mistakes as they did in Bakhmut. Also, the Ukrainians are saying that currently the Battle of Avdiivka, this is going to be the biggest mistake and the greatest losses of the Ukrainians if they try to use the Battle of Avdiivka as another battle for the stronghold Forteza. You remember the Ukrainians were calling Bakhmut the battle for Forteza. Avdiivka is getting the same battle, and this might lead to significant losses and very big losses in reputation and the manpower. And the fourth and the most important conclusion that the soldiers of 46th Brigade may do is that the most important and the only option for the Ukrainians is to start organized tactical retreating, tactical withdrawing of position. This is the only option for the Ukrainians if they want to save the personnel and not to lose everything, because if the Russians are able to encircle 10,000 army inside of Avdiivka, this is going to be complete disaster. Important update about Avdiivka, that the level of quality of services from Starlink was reduced till zero, and this, according to some sources, this was the reason why the Ukrainians were so much defeated and they're about to collapse completely. And other sources are saying that the Russians start using Starlink in Donetsk and Avdiivka direction. Somehow the Russians managed to buy the Starlink terminals in the United Arab Emirates, and now they're using Starlinks in Donetsk region, and there is no problem. So there are going to be a lot of questions to Elon Musk, first of all, from the United States authorities, but very likely, once again, that this might be like a fake information and propaganda with the purpose to push and to press on Elon Musk, because we know that today, on the 9th of February, there are going to be published interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin, and this interview will be published in social network X and in Tucker Carlson personal website. As I know, Tucker Carlson is going to have a lot of problems because of this interview. The Western countries probably will not keep him alone with this situation. We will discuss this in the future. So maybe these updates with Starlinks, that the Russians start using Starlinks, the Western countries, Western authorities, Joe Biden wants to use against Elon Musk and to force him to block this interview on the X network, social network. Anyway, we'll see, because this is going to be obviously a very interesting event. And once again, because the fact that the interview has already happened, and we're gonna see this interview, obviously this is going to be very powerful media explosion. It's going to be media nuclear explosion, and obviously which will affect Zelensky himself, Biden himself, and so on. So that's why I expect this night some provocation from the Western countries. Maybe the Western countries will try to destroy Crimean Bridge once again, because we have another additional update of the RQ-4B Global Hawk flying above the Black Sea. They start started the intelligence operation, also Boeing P-8A, and they're trying to do something, and obviously they need to do something if they want to reduce the media effect from the interview between Carlson and Tucker Carlson Putin. They need to make something like destroy Crimea Bridge or something like this, very loud, very media big victory or something, but we understand that very likely they will not be able to do anything. Anyway, let's follow the situation. Another important updates are coming from Mykhailivka. Today we got some adjustments on the map. If you remember, a few days ago, the Russian sources published the video how the Russians were establishing the flag. We added the flag softly on map because, see, this flag wasn't geolocated, it was very difficult to geolocate and so on. And today some Russian centers managed to do this. They geolocated the Russian flag, and according to information we have, the area where the Russian flag was established is the northern part of Mykhailivka, and this is huge advance and very huge progress of the Russian army. We will adjust the map because according to this geolocation, as a result of Russian attack, they managed to establish very big control over very big territory, and probably the Russians maybe already control more than 50% of Mykhailivka. Maybe the Russians have already forced the Ukrainians to step back to the eastern part of the village. And the only reason the Russians still haven't published this information is because of interview with Tucker Carlson. So they don't want to, let's say, to break one big piece of news with another. They want to wait the end of the interview, and then they will publish more updates about further and additional Russian progress in the central and the eastern part and the western part of Mykhailivka. Very likely, because this video was published on the 4th of February, a very long time ago. And it's almost 4 days passed since that event, so that's mean that the Russians very likely managed to bypass significant territories during these days. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction. We have before this, of course, few important things are coming from the close rear of Avdiivka direction. The Russians published additional video of explosions and the results of explosions in Selidova. As you can see on this video, as a result of explosion, the entire building was destroyed, probably the building that Ukrainians were using as a temporary position. We have explosions and geolocated videos from Kurakhova itself. Now this is the only, let's call it logistical zone. We see another explosion inside of the city. And then we have the full video of how the Russians managed to discover and to destroy another Ukrainian base, probably with ballistic missile. I don't think that was a FAB or something like this. So anyway, the pressure is increasing every day, and I'm telling you, very soon the Ukrainians will withdraw their positions and they will basically start retreating process and I believe that this is going to be the first thing that will force soldiers of Ukrainian army to believe in Syrskyi. He needs to organize, not defense, but organize tactical retreat and to save as many as possible soldiers and the personnel. And if he can do this, this will be counted as his victory. He will blame everything Zaluzhny, that was his fault, that the situation of Avdiivka went so far, and he saved the soldiers and the personnel, and everybody is happy. So I think this situation is going to develop this way. I don't think that Syrskyi is able to save that stronghold. When talking about Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction, we don't have any updates, just the Russians are pushing in direction of the Ukrainians in the vicinity of Avdiivka, and we have more geolocations of FPV drone strikes against the Ukrainian forces along the tree line from Ivanovskaya to the south, which maybe confirms or give us some piece of information that the Russians very likely were forced to step back because they haven't managed to dig in deeper in this part of Ivanovska. The most important updates are coming from Bilogorovka. The Russians continue offensive operation, and according to some sources, the Russians established complete control over the filtration station, over this territory, and according to some crazy updates, the Russians currently try to storm the landfill. I don't know how the Russians are going to do this and how to believe this piece of news, because it's obviously suicide operation. Maybe the Russians managed to create another tunnel, another pipe operation, who knows, and maybe they managed to bypass the territories. You know, the Russians are very, let's say, I don't know, experienced in building the tunnels and so on. So the clashes in this area continues. The Russians published the video of artillery bombing of Ukrainian positions, very heavy bombing, which also confirms the something like artillery preparation. But if you ask my opinion, I believe and I wait for Russian offensive operation in direction of Bilogorovka from Syrskyi Donetsk River, because this territory was under very heavy fire during the previous days with SnowStorm flamethrower systems, with artillery force, with FPV drones. So I expect this progress, maybe as well as this one. When talking about Liman Tirny direction, we have geolocated confirmation of Russian progress in front of Zherebets River, and which confirms we have adjusted the map, and we have some reports that the Russians were forced to step back from this forest. This forest has the, let's say, sacred title, the gloves, because as you can see, this is like a piece of glove, this one, like that children wears on their hands. This is big finger, and this is small, four fingers, this is fifth finger, and this is like the area by the name of gloves. And this is fish, so we have the progress of the Russians in fish forest, and according to sources we have, the Russians were forced to step back from the gloves forest because they couldn't, like say, dig in deeper in this area. For now, we're not going to change the map because we don't have geolocated confirmations of that. Kupiansk and the direction, there are no updates. Probably there are very heavy clashes, but no geolocations, no reports. And the Ministry of Defense reported about the lowest level of losses since the beginning of 35. It's nothing, it's just regular activity. According to information we have, the Ukrainian authorities started shut down the electricity in the villages and the cities along the border because they announced about the evacuation, but most of the people don't want to evacuate. They're waiting for the Russians and so on. So that's why the Ukrainians start turning off the electricity with the purpose to force them to step back, to retreat from this territory, to evacuate from this area. No videos from Vovchansk. Today there were maybe there were some clashes and bombings and aviation bombings, but we don't have any geolocated videos or something like this. Very interesting update is coming from Poland. Today Andrzej Duda, the president of Poland, reported that confirmed that is confident that Trump will end the war in Ukraine in 20 hours as promised. This is a very important update because the thing is that if the president of Poland confirms that Trump will end the war in Ukraine, that means that he is like the first man who started the race. He started the race of how the Ukrainian politicals will start support Trump in the president elections. And Duda, it's very risky to support Trump when Biden's still the president of the United States of America. And his support, official support, means that Poland has already changed its, let's say, politic, and they start supporting Trump because they want to get some benefits from Trump when he become president, and then they want to tell him, Trump, we supported you when you wasn't the president. So something like this, and this is also another very bad signal for Ukraine and Biden as well, because European politicals stop supporting and believing in Biden's win. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.